All right, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from RicoScores, and man, I do not know about this one, man. Y'all know I'm Mr. Glass Half Full, Mr. Optimistic, but the Washington Commanders have officially hired offensive lines coach Bobby Johnson that is coming from coaching the Giants for the past 2 years as their offensive lines coach. Of course, we're going to do a full deep dive reaction and all of that type of stuff because man, we're going to take a not only look at like grades and where the Giants O-line ranked and things like that, but we're also going to take a look at some really alarming stats from the offensive line. And also, I want to talk about how you can argue that the Giants O-line is even more naturally talented than ours. So if he couldn't get greatness out of them, what do we expect him to do here? And then also, in good news, Ryan Kerrigan will stay as our assistant linebackers coach slash pass rush specialist. I'm really excited about that. That's going to be really interesting. And then there's also some more coaching updates about a few guys that will not return for the Commanders. So those are a few positional coaches that we know for a fact we need to go out and get guys to hire for those positions, to fill those positions in. But of course, most of this video is going to be centered around this Bobby Johnson hire and why it is what it is, man. We got to talk about it. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Stay tuned for all the content. I'm coming with constant updates. I just finished recording a video and was almost done editing it, and then this breaking news came out, so now I'm recording this and I'll put that video out later this evening slash night sometime later. And I just had to stop everything I was doing to knock this out, which is how this channel works. Some breaking news comes out, best believe I'm on it unless I'm just literally not at home. Stay tuned for all of this stuff. Like, I'm working on mock drafts, I'm working on film sessions with draft prospects, everything. Stay tuned. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get to this video. Let's get it. All right, so the first person I saw reported was John Keim. He tweeted out / reported, Washington is hiring Bobby Johnson as the offensive lines coach, as Tom Pelissero reported. So apparently Tom Pelissero said it first. Coached Buffalo's offensive line from 2019 to 2021 and the New York Giants the last 2 years. Was fired after this past season. Has also coached tight ends at various stops. And I want to emphasize that he was fired by the Giants. This is not somebody we're stealing from the Giants like how we stole Larry Izzo from the Seahawks. We stole Jason Simmons from the Raiders. No, we did not steal Bobby Johnson. That man completely was just fired, and he was just out there hoping for a job, and for some reason we're the ones giving him that job. Now, he followed Brian DeBall from Buffalo to New York. Well, I mean, that's kind of redundant. From Buffalo Bills to the New York Giants. He has 20 plus years of coaching experience, so he's very experienced. But boy, I'm scared. The fact that Giants fans are so happy about this does in fact scare me. Now, of course, I do my own research. I don't assume that they're just automatically right, but it's hard to argue that this isn't at the very least the most questionable hire yet. Very concerned. And of course, this is a positional coach, so it's not like this is as alarming as us potentially hiring a bad GM or a bad head coach or even a bad offensive coordinator or a bad defensive coordinator, but it still can affect us in the long term. I'm very afraid of this signing. We're going to break it down now. Now, of course, the Washington Commanders have now hired another ex-NFC East coach, which is very interesting because we brought over Brian Johnson, who knows the Eagles inside and out. And not only just that, he was Dak Prescott's quarterbacks coach in college. So he knows Dak Prescott's weaknesses and habits. We can use that against them. He knows Jalen Hurts' weaknesses and habits because Jalen Hurts had the best season of his NFL career with Brian Johnson as his QB's coach a couple of years ago when they went to the Super Bowl. So he knows all of his weaknesses and habits. We can use that against him. Dan Quinn has been the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys for the past 3 years. If anybody knows the Cowboys or even the Commanders, the Giants, or the Eagles, having to play them 2 times a year and coaching for the Cowboys themselves is Dan Quinn. And so now you're adding Bobby Johnson to the list of NFC East division rival coaches that we're bringing to the Commanders. Now we finally have a guy for the Giants in the building. And so was it the fact that he coached for the Giants the past 2 years one of the biggest reasons that we hired him? At this point, it seems like it. I highly doubt it, but still, that's like the only potentially glass half full part of this. I could really spin this, man. Maybe that information could potentially be useful to us, but I don't know. But at the end of the day, man, I'm going to go ahead and get this out the way. I do not like this hire. Even independent from what Giants fans think and say, I don't think this hire, from what I've seen and watched and read so far, that it's a good hire. I don't think so. And what scares me the most is that I feel like the offensive lines coach was one of the most important positional coaches that we had to get right the most in this offseason. We haven't had a really good offensive lines coach since Bill Callahan left to go work for the Browns, and I'm sick of it. I'm going to give him a chance. We got to give him a chance. We got to see where this is going. Maybe he knows what he did wrong with the Giants. He can come here and do the exact opposite. But even as a glass half full guy that I am, I don't know about this one, man. Like I said, offensive lines coach was probably the positional coach that we had to get right the most, man. Like the most. Of course, like offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, head coach, all of that matters more, obviously. But then you could say quarterbacks coach maybe after that. And I feel like we killed it with Brian Johnson and keeping Tavita Pritchard here. That group of quarterback developers right there is elite, in my opinion. And so I felt like after that, it had to be offensive lines coach, because that's where we've been lacking so much the past few years. And I can argue that we had a better guy on staff coaching our offensive line last year than the guy that we just hired. I feel like, if anything, we may have netted negative. I don't know. I'm not very sure about this one, man. I really am not. Of course, edge rusher matters, linebacker matters, every positional group matters. But I feel like offensive line, especially in our case, when we really want to see a jump in production in our offensive line going from 2023 to this upcoming 2024 season, I feel like we had to get this right, and I don't feel like we're getting it right. Pro Football Focus has the Giants offensive line ranked 30th in the NFL, only 2 teams worse. And they said, aside from Andrew Thomas, no Giants offensive lineman earned a Pro Football Focus overall grade above a 65. Perhaps the most worrying part for Giants fans is the lack of development from a second-year right tackle in Evan Neal, who earned a 42.1 overall grade this season. Oh my lord. Then Pro Football Network has them ranked 31st, one spot lower than Pro Football Focus. And they said the injuries have slowed down for the G-men, but their performance remains some of the worst in the NFL. So they were relatively healthy last year and still were bad. They struggle from left to right, aside from Logan Thomas at left tackle, basically. However, Pugh off the couch has been better than anything else New York tried at guard before his arrival, which is really interesting. So maybe they just, I guess the only glass half full way that you can spin this, the fact that Pugh came in and just was instantly better than anything they had just fresh off the couch, is that maybe it's more of an Italian evaluation standpoint. Maybe Evan Neal wasn't as good as we thought. Maybe he wasn't worth that first round pick. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe it's not the coaching. Maybe the perceived talent that they have because of the draft picks that they were taking at is the problem. Maybe they were reaches in the draft and things like that. And maybe he could potentially be a decent coach and he just needs better talent. And apparently, even though the Giants have drafted better talent, from what it seems, from 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, I guess technically it wasn't. So do we blame the Giants GM more than we blame the offensive lines coach? I don't know, man. That's the only glass half full way of spinning this, man. And then Player Profiler has them ranked dead last in the NFL, the worst offensive line in the NFL, in their opinion. They said offensive line for the Giants has been an absolute disaster, and it's been that for a couple of years now. This is not like, it's not like 2023. This just came out of nowhere that the offensive line was bad. It's been bad. The season started with Andrew Thomas suffering a hamstring injury that limited him to 435 snaps. 2022 first round pick Evan Neal continued the struggles from his rookie season, looking stiff in pass protection while allowing 2 sacks and 30 pressures on 309 pass blocks. Giants fans likely saw his trip to the injured reserve as a blessing, but it is a big hit to his development. Finally, a 2023 second round pick, John Michael Schmitz Jr. struggled in his first year with a 48.8 Pro Football Focus grade while missing 4 games of his own. And you could easily argue that the Giants had the worst O-line in the NFL last year, independent of what Pro Football Focus, Pro Football Network, and Player Profiler are saying. Just based off of just watching the tape, you could easily say they had the worst O-line in football. Like, you could argue poor Daniel Jones and all of those other quarterbacks that ended up playing for them last year. They were going through it, man. And yeah, I know there's talent required for an offensive line to work, but coaching plays a huge role in it. Like, really huge. And you can argue that the Giants O-line does have a lot of talent, which makes hiring their offensive line coach here even scarier, because you can argue they have more talent than we do on our offensive line. Andrew Thomas, again, was a 4th overall pick in the first round and is a really good tackle now. They hit on that. But that's the Georgia Bulldogs, so of course they hit on that. Of course he was going to be great. Evan Neal was drafted 7th overall in the first round of the draft a couple of years ago, and I don't even know what's going on with him, why he's so bad. John Michael Smith Jr. was drafted in the 2nd round, like we just said. Just from those 3 players alone, they have 2 first rounders and a 2nd rounder in their offensive line group, and they were still terrible. We will more than likely not even be able to draft an offensive lineman in the first round of this upcoming draft. So why would he be able to get greatness with this less perceived talented offensive line than he was able to for the more perceived talented Giants offensive line? That's my main point. Why do we expect him to come here and figure it out and get this offensive line to work when the Giants offensive line was arguably more talented, more naturally talented, and should have been better, had a higher ceiling at the very least? And I also want to point out the fact that the Giants allowed the 2nd most sacks with 85 in NFL history this past season. I just want to make sure we emphasize that the 2nd most sacks in NFL history just came from that Giants offensive lines coach that we just hired as now our Washington Commanders offensive line coach. I don't see it in any way. I'm trying to spin it as much as I can. Y'all know I try to. That's my job. But I'm out of answers for this one. And now I'm also scared because remember, we signed Nick Gates from the Giants last offseason. That failed. We brought him in to be our starting center. And so after taking their center and it didn't work out, we want to take their offensive lines coach and see if that works out. And then on top of that, does this make it more likely that Nick Gates returns as our starting center? Because maybe this offensive lines coach, it has a little bit more attachment to him and feels like he could get greatness out of him type of thing. Like, I can fix it. I'm telling you, I can fix him type of thing. Because if it does, I'm even more down on this hire than I already am. Like, if Nick Gates is more likely to start because we hired his ex-offensive lines coach and brought him from the Giants over here to the Commanders a year after he joined the Commanders, if that increases Nick Gates' chances of starting even by a 0.05%, I hate this hire, dog. I do not want Nick Gates starting at center for us under any circumstances. Please, Ricky Stromberg, or whoever we may end up drafting in this upcoming draft. It's also hilarious, too, because I do want to point out that we missed on Ben Johnson. So we ended up hiring Brian Johnson and Bobby Johnson. So I guess in the Commanders' logic of things, if you miss out on one B. Johnson, go get another 2 B. Johnsons to make up for it. That's absolutely hilarious. And then, of course, a lot of people are going to make OG Bobby Johnson jokes and all of that type of stuff. I'm already expecting to hear that. I'm already expecting to hear people doing the songs and stuff. OG Bobby Johnson, face But going from all of that sad news, I don't even want to say it's bad news. It's sad news in my opinion, because I just don't even know how to spin it. But in good news, Ryan Kerrigan will return as the Washington Commanders assistant linebackers coach and pass rush specialist. And I don't want to think too deeply into that, but I think it is interesting that he's like the linebackers coach, pass rush specialist coach. It sounds like we're gonna more so go from like a typical 4-3 defensive line with 2 defensive ends that are on the outside to more of like an 3-4 outside linebacker type of thing. So think more Khalil Mack, Von Miller than like a Montez Sweat and a Chase Young, I guess is the best way to say it. It sounds like we're gonna have more so outside linebacker like edge rushers, the guys that are a little bit smaller than the typical edge setting, run stopping edge rushers that we've been using with 4 defensive linemen. We're gonna more so go to like a more 5 defensive lineman set. Potentially, that's what it sounds like, because he's our pass rush specialist, but he's also our linebackers coach. And when you blend those two together, sounds like a 3-4 outside linebacker to me coming off that edge. much. So it sounds like we may start to prioritize that type of talent when we're going into this offseason, coming into free agency, coming into the draft. Again, this is pure speculation. This is me just thinking too much like I always do, but I just thought that was really interesting. We may be switching to a 3-4 defense. And this is really interesting because Dan Quinn, the entire time he was with the Cowboys, was running a 4-3 defense. That's what he does. He likes a 4-3 defense. And he mentioned like a couple of years ago, he was going to start to add more 3-4 defense elements. And that's really similar to what Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera were doing this past year. They were a 4-3 defense, but we were starting to see more and more year after year these past couple of seasons that they were adding more 3-4 defense elements, having more 5 defensive linemen, like a guy like a John Ridgeway or Fedarian Mathis in the middle, with Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen as defensive tackles. And then you have extra edge rushers on the outside, so that's 5 defensive linemen technically. But we didn't really have like a true 3-4 outside linebacker type of guy. I mean, Shaka Toney was supposed to be that guy. Then he got caught gambling and was suspended for the entire year, things like that. So this is really interesting. Again, I'm just overthinking things. That's just what I typically do. But I just thought it was interesting that maybe he's really going to dive into doing more of like a 3-4 defense type of, adding those type of elements to his already 4-3 defense. Now, of course, Joe Wood Jr. is taking over as the defensive coordinator. Maybe we could see a dramatic switch because of that, but I doubt it. I think things are going to run pretty smoothly going from what they were doing for the Cowboys to the Commanders. They just got to draft the right talent to fit that scheme. I think we're going to definitely look more like the Cowboys than when Dan Quinn was running for the defense for the Seahawks. And I'm really excited about that. But again, with Ryan Kerrigan, good news. I'm happy that we're keeping him, but it's really interesting. He's the assistant linebackers coach and pass rush specialist. You combine that, that's an outside linebacker all day to me. But again, I'm probably just overthinking things. Also to overthink things, now that he's the assistant linebackers coach and pass rush specialist coach and not the defensive lines coach, does that mean Jeff Zgonina ends up staying as the defensive lines coach? But shouts out my boy Serge the Shoot over there. He tweeted out something a few days ago saying that he's gotten word that an legendary Redskins player could potentially be the guy that ends up getting the defensive lines coach position. He could end up being the guy getting hired by us, and I'm really intrigued by who that is because he said that it wasn't going to be Ryan Kerrigan, but he also said at the end of the tweet that let's see if this source is right. He just has good word from a source. He's not going to out the source, and he's also not just putting all of his eggs in one basket and assuming that the source is right. He said let's see how it plays out, but he's hearing that it won't be Ryan Kerrigan. It'll be an ex-legend from the Redskins. I'm really excited to see who that is. And then also, before we get up out of here, among those also not returning per sources are tight ends coach Todd Storm, so we need a new one of those. Run game coordinator Juan Castillo, we need another one of those, but run game coordinator can be somebody that also does something else potentially. And then offensive lines coach Travell Wharton, he won't be back. And also senior defensive assistant and safeties coach Richard Rodgers will not be back as well. I'm not surprised by that one at all. The other three, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're surprising. It was kind of 50-50 on all of those, but Travell Wharton was pretty much destined to be gone. Him and Brent Vesselmeyer, once we brought in Jason Simmons, Joe Witt Jr., and even Dan Quinn as the head coach, all of these guys specializing in developing DBs and things like that. Those guys were pretty much as good as gone, and they may be trying to do whatever they can to bring over Al Harris, because again, like I've talked about in previous videos, the Cowboys blocked us from interviewing Al Harris, the DB's coach for the Cowboys right now, but their situation is in flux right now. It's chaotic because they just hired a new defensive coordinator. That guy may want to bring in a different guy to be his DB's coach and may not even want to promote Al Harris to a different position. So if Al Harris technically ends up getting fired by the Cowboys, I really hope we bring him in. That could make up for potentially this Bobby Johnson offensive lines coach. They probably cancel each other out as far as a net zero, just net neutral type of thing. That's how excited I am about Al Harris, but that's also how low I am on this current Bobby Johnson hire that we just made. But at the same time though, again, back to my point, like I said earlier, honestly, if it was between Travell Wharton and OG Bobby Johnson, I would have taken Travell Wharton in my personal opinion, even though ideally, ceiling-wise, I would prefer to move on from Travell Wharton and get somebody better. But if you would have told me that firing Travell Wharton would end up with us hiring Bobby Johnson, I would have just said sticking with Travell Wharton. But I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully this is a 1-year short-term prove-it deal contract, and then maybe we have a new offensive lines coach by next year. Or maybe for some reason this guy comes here and just suddenly figures it out. He just gets the secret sauce. He drinks that Space Jam halftime water from Bugs Bunny and just turns into a genius. I don't know. Takes the limitless pill. I don't know, but I hope it works out. But again, now we still have other positional coaches where it's kind of like, yeah, we're probably going to need a guy. Remember, Randy Jordan got hired by a different team, so he's gone as our running backs coach. We need that. We also now need a tight ends coach. We need a run game coordinator, an offensive lines coach, and a safeties coach, defensive assistant, whatever you want to call it, where Richard Rodgers is now officially leaving. And I guess we don't need an offensive lines coach, but I will argue even after hiring Bobby Johnson just a few minutes ago that we still need an offensive lines coach. I mean, at this point, I hope our assistant offensive lines coach, even if teams even hire those, I hope that guy, if we do hire one, comes in is just an absolute genius and a prodigy at the situation, because I'm scared, man. Hopefully the tight ends coach that we bring in is so great at that he has ex-offensive lines coach experience and he can help Bobby Johnson in some way. I don't know, man. I guess they figure we're going to pass the ball so much that maybe your offensive line can just focus on being one-dimensional and they don't have to be. I don't know, man. I'm trying to spin this as many ways as possible, man. I'm scared, man. I'm really scared for whoever we end up throwing out there at quarterback, whether it's Sam Howell or a top 2 pick, whatever, whoever we end up throwing out there as quarterback 2024 season, be very afraid. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release a informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. Really appreciate all of y'all. Stay tuned. Again, I was in the middle of recording and editing another video that I was planning on putting out originally. Now I'm just gonna delay that one till later in the day, and this one's coming out now. Stay tuned. Let me know in the comment section how you feel about this offensive lines coach and hire. Please let me know how y'all feel. Please, if any of y'all can see the bright side of this in any way, if there's anybody out there that likes this hire, please let us know in the comment section why, because I just need some sort of light. I need some light at the end of the tunnel, some way, shape, or form. Please, man, please let me know. Please let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my points. Let me know if you're excited about Ryan Kerrigan staying around. Let me know who you think our potential defensive lines coach may end up being. Let me know how you feel about who you may potentially want as like a tight ends coach who may be available out there, or potentially a passing game coordinator or defensive assistant safeties coach, running backs coach. Let me know what candidates out there that you may want to bring in for those positions as well. And I'm gonna keep y'all updated, because whenever we make those hires, of course, I'm gonna make videos for those as well. Stay tuned. I'm gonna catch y'all later. Appreciate y'all. I'm out.